what the average amount of time a person spends planning for retirement in their lifetime? 2.5 hours. The average person spends more time researching a refrigerator than planning for their retirement. I don't know why. Maybe because it's a number that's too far to reach or something they don't want to think about. But it's so important to understand the effects of inflation, the effects of taxes, the effects of health care. Medicare is going to be around. Social Security is going to be around. Longevity. How much money do you have? Is it going to be there for the rest of your life? And too many people underestimate the fact of earning more, what they call purchasing power, inflation, and taxes. And it's so critical to take all these concepts and apply them to real-world situations. Not just in the book, but you've got to understand not only those situations for retirement, but how they pertain to the current environment, the economy, the stock market. Because it's not just in a book and trying to find a formula. It's identifying where we are in the economy and knowing where we're going. A phrase I like to use, be the expert or hire one. And it's so critical. Because that's exactly, for instance, what we do for our clients. We take a very holistic, big picture approach. We don't swing for the fences or have a one-size-fits-all. We work with people individually, as I said earlier, with their wealth management needs through their lifetime to make sure everything is set and making sure you get there. I find in 27 years, the number one thing people do most is take way too much risk. People think they need to be all or none in the market. They got to be all in or all in. Instead of trying to find the sweet spot or reducing the risk. I mean, for instance, what we specialize in is getting the very best returns with the least amount of risk possible. I don't claim to beat the markets, although quite often we do it. Most of our clients, if I said we could get 70 or 80% of the upside with only 20 or 30% of the risk, that's most of what people want. It's that top 20% that has the most risk that people don't realize. Either holding the stock too far, going too much in one direction. Here's a common one. Too many people like to invest a small portion of their money in real aggressive stocks and then keep a lot of it in cash instead of just investing the whole thing at a very moderate return. But it's so important to factor all these concepts in and see how they pertain to the economy and the market. Now, I talked about earlier how in December of 2007 I wrote that Economic Sonata report and was able to forecast and predict the economy. Let me ask everybody, how many people think we're on our way out? The government just threw another $600 billion in, borrowed from me, you, and our kids and everything else. Anybody feel we're on our way out? Okay, that's good. 2? Great. Everybody? How about most of us feel that it's going to be a little bit tougher, more of a slog through the mud? Okay, a little bit tougher. Nobody seems to take the view that do you really need to put $600 billion into the economy if it's good? Really think we're that good, would you want it? Do you really need to borrow more money? And they're already talking about a QE3 and a QE4. The most important thing is to identify where we are in the economy and identify in the cycle. And that's what some people are able to do and what I was able to do based on demographics and where we are in the cycles. We went through the biggest bull market in the history of time from 1983 to 1999. Does anybody know why? Any guesses? We had the largest segment of the population, an enormous 77 million people, reaching their peak spending years and spending because they need to. You see, we know how people spend money. It's very, very predictable. We know that you hit the workforce around 22, 23. You get an apartment, so it spurs need for apartment-type furniture through the crate and barrel. We know you get married around 25, 26. You have a child around 29 to 30. You buy your first home 30, 31. We know you buy your biggest home, take on your most debt at 42. Here's a good one. Does anybody know when you buy the most potato chips? Come on now. Throw some numbers out. When do you buy the most potato chips? Nobody has any idea. 42. Not because you're eating them at 42, it's because you have a 12 and 14-year-old at home eating your house. And it's so important to identify because if you know how people spend money, and people spend money in very predictable ways, if you know how they spend money, you can predict and forecast the economy. You know how many people are in the economy at what particular age. Now, you don't look at that chart, the chart. By identifying and knowing how people spend, we know that the baby boomers were reaching their peak spending years. I mean, we know how people spend their money all the way from 18 to 68. You know, I could go on forever. You buy your nicest car at 55, you drink your best wine at 54, you go to leisure international travel at 57. But as you can see, spending money is very predictable. And why this is important is because if we know how the economy is going to grow, what does an economy need to grow? More spending. And when it stops having spenders and has savers, what happens to the economy? It starts to shrink. Is there any coincidence that Dominic talked about earlier, the most number of second homes was in 2005? Is there any coincidence that housing peaked in 2005? We know that people peak spending at 48 years old. 1957 was the largest birth year this nation's ever seen. We know people peak at 48 years old, and 1957 was the largest birth year. Who can add 48 to 1957? 2005. What a coincidence. Housing peaked in 2005, just as the baby boomers no longer needed that bigger home, just as the kids were leaving the nest. Not that they stopped spending money, but you no longer need a car every year or two because you're not going to soccer practice 4 times a day. You're not buying shoes that the kids never wear. Naturally, you're buying things that you need, but you're not spending money like you used to. And as you approach 50, people tend to save more, and saving does not help an economy. It was no coincidence that the economy peaked in 2005 because that was the largest birth year. And by identifying where people and how people spend money, you can look and identify where we are in the economy. You can see this. This is the baby boomers' birth years, and this is the last few years, and this is 1957. You can see what happens to births right here. Now, the baby boomers' kids, the echo boomers, come up in another 5, 6, 7 years, and they're actually larger than the baby boomers. And they'll pick up the slack for us now. But you can see what I look at in the type of research that I do, and I've been studying this since the late 90s. Looking at this number, hard to believe saying, 98, 99, say, wow, 2006, 2007, the market's got to be. And I don't say this to scare you. I say it simply so we all understand what to expect from the economy and what to expect from the market. If we know how people spend their money and we know how many people there are at particular ages, you can identify where we're going in the economy and how we're going to spend their money and what the economy is going to do. And that's what's so critical. So many people look every day and say, wow, we're in a recession, typical inventory recession, we're going to come out of it like we always do. The problem we have here today, folks, is we have 2 major problems. We've got the demographic problem of an aging baby boomer, people spending less, saving more. And we've got a massively over-leveraged population who, as Dominic talked about earlier, use their houses as ATM and no longer has not only enough money to retire, but they don't have money in the bank or savings. And they were decimated by the last crash. The government's doing everything it can to create inflation, but they can't. We have deflation going on. If the government stopped pumping money in, we'd have serious deflation. And it's so important to identify, to see this. And again, can we go one more chart? I just had one more chart. I wasn't even sure I was going to use that, but sometimes they go perfect. What's so important to identify is where we are in the economy. This right here is the bull market of the 80s and 90s when the baby boomers reaching their peak spending. Bull markets last 10 to 17 years. Bear markets last anywhere from 15 to 30 years. You can see the 1930s. Interesting enough, if you bought stocks at the beginning of the crash in 1929, it took you 25 years to break in. And I want to bring this up, again, not to scare you, but to realize that we are just simply in the middle of a bear market. Doesn't mean you can't make money. In fact, the 1930s created the most millionaires this nation's ever seen. But you have to know how to approach the markets, like I said earlier. Most people take way too much risk. We specialize really in taking the least amount of risk possible. I'm a big believer in income and dividends to get returns. We beat the market sometimes, but that's not the goal. It's achieving your goals and objectives with the least amount of risk possible. And again, I say this just so we all understand where we are in the economy and the markets. It coincides well with what Dominic was talking about. People don't factor in all the important things for retirement. What is the effect of inflation on my portfolio? What about tax? What about longevity? What if I live longer? What if they invent the pill when you're 90 and lasts 20 more years? I mean, how many people in here expect to win the lottery as their pension plan? Beats the other guy who had to go to jail until he got Medicare. A lot of lottery there. But identifying what you need and having the right money management style, technique, and someone to work with that knows what's going on, knows where we are, and knows what they're doing, I can't stress enough.